Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast and our celebration of Pollinator Week. Beekeeping Today podcast, presented by Bee Culture Magazine, is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flottam.
Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
That's right. We want to thank Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today, and while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping, Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. Additionally, we want to thank Better Bee for sponsoring our Pollinator Week series of podcasts. Better Bee, beekeepers serving beekeepers at www.betterbee.com. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms, the sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects. Learn more from our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and our guest co-host, Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And welcome, everybody, to our third day of our Pollinator Week series of special shows. Yesterday, we talked to Dr. Chip Taylor about his monarch way stations, and today we talked with Andony Melathopoulos of the Oregon State Agriculture Extension Service about all the programs he has going down in the state of Oregon. It's going to be a good show.
It should be. I enjoyed talking with Chip yesterday, and I'm looking forward to talking to Andony. And you mentioned Kirsten, who will be here Friday with her guest, Dave Goulson. So that should be pretty special, too.
Real good.
Looking forward to that. And did you get a chance to watch the movie last night?
You know, actually, I was not able to watch it last night. I hope to watch it yet this week.
It's a good movie. It's an inside look at commercial pollination that you're not going to get anywhere else. The people, the equipment, the places they go, the stress they put on the bees. It's eye-opening and worth your time. So folks, make time to go watch it.
Yeah, it's available from anywhere you download and stream your video shows, such as Apple TV. And listeners, you may recognize some voices and see some faces to a couple of guests we've had on the show, such as Dr. Jonathan Lundgren and beekeeper John Miller. So really good show from friend of the podcast, Peter Nelson, and the movie The Pollinators. Well, Kim, let's get on with our interview with Andony and everything that's going on in Oregon.
Okay.
Welcome, Andony Melathopoulos, to Pollinator Week on Beekeeping Today podcast.
It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's our honor.
It's good to see you again, Andony.
Always great, Kim.
You and I were in Missouri, right, a while ago when we did your podcast, PolliNation.
Wasn't that a great meeting?
It was.
They really put on a good show there. That was so great, and I love that they had both the program for the beginners, but also the great program for the more advanced beekeepers. What a great beekeeping conference.
Yeah, it was a good time to be there. Well, like I said, it's good to see you again, and I know that you've been up to a lot. I read your newsletter, and again, I'll just reiterate, Andony is the Pollinator Health Extension Specialist in Oregon, and he has a lot of things going all at the same time. You've got a lot of balls in the air, and can we squeeze all of them into about 40 minutes?
Yeah, we totally could.
To concentrate.
They all connect together, so there's a thread that ties them. So yeah, we could do it.
Okay. Well, you work in a place called the Pollinator Health Lab, and I know that you've got several projects ongoing. Some of them going faster than others, and I'm just going to sit back and let you tell us what you do and who you do it with, so that people can kind of pick up some of the information that you've got and know where to go from here.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, it's a unique program. I do think I'm the only faculty member in the United States with this job description, which is daunting because it is not traditional apiculture extension. And obviously, apiculture extension is vital, and we're losing apiculture extension. Having more extension people working in apiculture is critical. But we had this thing that happened here back in 2013. There was, if everybody can remember, there was this bumblebee kill. A pesticide applicator applied a pesticide to blooming linden trees that resulted in a bumblebee kill, but it was persisting. Throughout 2013 and in 2014, there were a number of these kills. The legislature got involved, and that created a space to sort of reach some new people about pollinators, honeybees, but also native bees. And the program really does focus on bees. I don't know anything about butterflies or hummingbirds.
Well, I think bees. I remember the pesticide incidents. It was in a shopping center parking lot, I believe.
Unfortunately, on National Pollinator Week.
Yes. Oh, God.
Really awful.
I remember that disaster. What a way to get a job, though.
Well, I've thought about this. In apiculture, there are all these waves of people getting jobs. Like, I remember I was mentored. I was a master student of Mark Winston, and him and Gard Otis and a number of other people were hired on because of Africanized bees. And then another generation was hired on because of varroa mites. And then there was the pesticide people. Like, there are these waves of, if you look at through the faculty members in various universities, we get hired on through crises. That's sort of how we renew things, unfortunately.
That's very true. The way you look at it, you're exactly right. Well, all things considered, I hope that you being taken on at Oregon has helped the bumblebee population in shopping center parking lots.
Well, the remarkable thing about that incident was just how many bumblebees were dead. It's amazing that you could have a parking lot with that many bumblebees. And the kind of other part of the story is in Oregon, in Western Oregon, we have a remarkable diversity of bumblebee species. You can go there was some great work, and we do a lot of clover seed production, and you can go into those fields and find 6 different species of bumblebees, which is unheard of anywhere in the United States. So the flip side of it is there's remarkable bee biodiversity in the state, and we have an 80,000 strong beekeeping industry that pollinates a lot of crops. Our beekeepers are different from other states. They tuck into California and they do pollination there, but then they spend the rest of the year bouncing from crop to crop to crop in Oregon. So
are they primarily on the eastern side of Oregon? Because I know that's where a lot of the seed crops are.
Well, it's interesting. There's 2 things. It's a great state as well because we have 4 managed species. So the big seed production on the east side of the state is all alfalfa leaf-cutting bees. But we also have in certain places like near Walla Walla in eastern Oregon and Ontario, they have the only ground nesting managed bee species, the Alkali Bees, these beautiful silty beds. They're salted up, and every year these lovely bees come out. About National Pollinator Week, these bees come out and they pollinate the alfalfa. So we've got those seed crops are primarily not honeybee pollinated. In the east, though, we do have carrot seed. Most of the nation's carrot seed is produced on the other side of the Cascades in around the town of Madras. But we also have some of the best watermelons in the nation that are honeybee pollinated up in the Columbia River around Hermiston. But on the west side is where a lot of the crops are, a lot of our bee pollinated crops are.
All right. I was over in the Madras area during the solar eclipse, and was surprised by all of the bee colonies, and because they were very big into the pollination there, and it must have been the carrot seed. I couldn't tell what the seeds were.
It would have been, yes, absolutely, yeah.
It was pretty cool. It's fun.
One of the other things going on, I'm sure you're aware of, is the amount of honey that's produced in Oregon. Oregon made the top 10, was one of the top 10 states this year for the first time in a long time.
Did we?
So, yep.
I'll be darned.
Bee Culture Magazine puts together an annual honey report, and one of the charts we put together is the top 10. And you're on it this year. So congratulations.
You can imagine how hard it is to do because, some of these beekeepers are doing 4 pollinations a year. And so it's splitting, getting your colony strong enough, pulling off a honey crop. I'm from Alberta originally where we make, mammoth honey crops, 300 pounds a colony is not unheard of. But, there we've got to, bring the colonies out of winter, and ramp them up and then, hit the canola bloom and then it just pours in. Here it's a lot harder. It comes in dribs and drabs. It's difficult. So I'm glad to see us break the top 10. We got some talented beekeepers out here.
I know that we were just talking about the bumblebees and the parking lot, but I know that part of your job is working on reducing pesticide risk to bees, and that can't be just trees and parking lots. Where else are you looking at reducing pesticide problems?
Well, right across the state, and it's remarkable how pesticides impact pollinators. They do it in different ways. The obvious one is, using insecticides around bloom in crops. There's a lot of there's a whole host of specialty crops that beekeepers pollinate in the state. And there are some pest problems that happen around bloom. So there's an obvious kind of problem that can occur there. And one of the initiatives that we've done, and we've worked with the Clover Commission. We also specialty seed growers of Western Oregon. The beekeepers have sat down with those growers and the crop consultants. We have these meetings and we produce these really great, simple guides on how growers can work with beekeepers to really make sure the bees coming out of pollination are as strong as them going in.
Well, it'd be interesting to know how you organize that. Sometimes that can be kind of a touchy place to be. Get beekeepers on one side of the table and growers on the other side of the table and try to make things better for both of them. How did you manage that?
Well, I'll say one thing right off the bat. It's funny because everybody goes in with this concern, but they always leave fascinated. So the growers leave the meeting. I'm always surprised. I do a lot of training with growers, and I often show them a pallet of bees, and I ask them, is there 1 colony here, 4 colonies here, or 12 colonies? Because there's, 3 supers. And most of them say there's 1 colony. They don't know what a colony is. So whenever they get together with beekeepers, they're fascinated because there's not a lot of opportunities. You make the contract, the bees come in, but there's not a lot of opportunities to actually know how the bees work. And so typically, and the same with the beekeepers, they don't understand the pest problems specifically or the constraints. And usually after the meeting, they invite each other to go to their meetings. We had one of the seed growers at the last OSBA meeting because they really gave them an opportunity to talk. But basically, we bring them to the table. We tell them it's voluntary. This is an opportunity to sort of be proactive, get out in front of things. But we also tell the growers that if they do this, we're going to help promote their industry. So, for example, this year at the state fair, with the Oregon State Beekeepers Association has a wonderful booth. They'll be giving out seed packs from clover growers. And so we're helping to sort of make sure that what's communicated is let's be proactive and let's sort of like address issues. And it's funny, in some of those meetings, pesticides are not the top issue. I know one of the beekeepers in Oregon, a mentor of mine actually, Harry Vanderpool, points out that irrigation guns can pull the pallets and drag them if they're not placed properly. And so some of the issues are just kind of being mindful of where the bees are in the field and really making sure like a pallet doesn't go down right next to the highway so all the bees get smacked on the road. Being just mindful of bee placement and where they're going.
That's always a problem. The biggest one I'm aware of is the gate locked. Can I get in?
Yeah. You drive all the way out there.
Yeah.
You can't get access to that came up in a lot of the meetings.
Yep.
The beekeepers made clear you're not just renting bees, you're renting the beekeeper.
Yeah.
And so we need access to those colonies. They can't just be dropped off and neglected for a month.
It's always, in my experience, that's at the top of the list. Can I get to my bees when I need to get to my bees? As opposed to, can I get to my bees when you let me? It's good to get that cleared up right away. So, well, the other thing I know that you've got going, and it's got to go hand in hand, is increasing the amount of land planted to nectar and pollen producing plants. And I can see where farmers could, just jump on that, and homeowners and landowners, and keep the pesticides off from, or at least keep the pesticides down off those areas. I can see where those two get married really well.
They do. I think in some ways, so we do a lot of pesticide education. So we train, I think since I've been here, there's over 5,000 pesticide applicators who we've done training on how, I talk to more pesticide applicators than beekeepers, just straight up. They're my main group that I talk to. And we started off by just doing how to read the label, which is, it is not that easy. And I challenge beekeepers, can you understand the label? And most of them can't. And so getting pesticide applicators to understand the insecticide labels has been half of it. But the other thing that we've been doing is training vegetation managers. So the other kind of pesticides that are used are herbicides, and just coming, kind of helping people who are doing roadside management, forest management, how they can manage land so that they can enhance the pollinator habitat. But when we've talked to the beekeepers, the issue here in Oregon right now, colonies are ready to swarm. You never have problem in the Pacific Northwest, at least on the west side of the Cascades, with keeping nectar and pollen coming in the spring. The trouble is, after our blackberry blooms, we have a dearth. There's nothing but Queen Anne's lace, just things that honeybees just will go to out of desperation. There's a real gap. And obviously, that's the time of year your colonies need to set up for winter. If they kind of struggle and you're feeding syrup through August and there's really not a lot of pollen coming in, it can have these effects on the colonies that you're going to see in the winter. And so trying to figure out where we can fit pollinator habitat for honeybees in the fall in this landscape is tricky.
I tell you, that's been one of my biggest struggles. We moved here to Olympia several years ago, and just getting from Colorado, where we had nectar sources from springtime to the first snow, to suddenly having nothing after July 1. I mean, nothing. So
it's hard. I was same thing in Alberta. It's just like right to frost. You'd have like second cut alfalfa, and you'd still be putting on some weight, but here it just stops.
It stops. It's just a tap.
Well, I'm going to show my ignorance of Northwest U.S. climate here. The image that I've always had is that you guys have rain 365 days a year. Apparently, that's not true.
It's not true. This is a Mediterranean climate, and so it does rain. So this is the thing. People often talk about pollinator habitat by plant lists, and it's really useless. You have to think about what growers and what land managers can plug in to their existing landscapes. And, we have a lot of moisture where you can establish plants with the fall seeding, and, they'll come up. So there's some opportunities here that are not available in other parts of the country where the winter is just not the growing season. Here, everything greens up in the winter because that rain just is relentless, freezing temperature, or just at the freezing point sometimes. But the summer, that's why we have so much seed production in the Pacific Northwest, is because it's dry as a bone. It rains and rains and rains, so you get all these crops well established. But when it comes time to harvest that seed, there's not a drop of moisture. So it dries right up.
Yeah, that makes it easier from that perspective. Certainly, I can see that. Well, what about, I know that you also work with right down to homeowners, don't you?
We do. We have been working, the master gardeners. So the growers are one thing, and I think coming up with systems that work for them. We had a grant from the National Honey Board looking at pasture systems. A lot of these sub-clover pasture systems, the way they typically do them is they grow them, they green up, and then in the summer they just sort of sit vacant. But it's a great opportunity. We've been putting sandfoin, bird's foot trefoil, some good honey plants into those, allowing them to grow up through August so that there's something for bees to feed on, and then they can bring the lambs back in and bring the sheep back in and graze them. So there's opportunities for growers, but with with homeowners, there's an intense interest in the Pacific Northwest for pollinator plants and pollinator gardens. But fortunately, we have one of the most formidable master gardener networks in the state here in Oregon. They're really well organized. And at the very top of the master gardeners in Oregon, we have an excellent pollinator person. So the master gardener coordinator for Oregon is Gail Longalato, and she comes from a pollinator background. So we're really strong in providing resources to our master gardeners. And we have a publication coming out in May that's a comprehensive, 30-page guide on plants with landscape designs that people like, low maintenance ones for people like me who don't know anything about gardening, can implement, to people who want to just grow native plants with a really kind of thought out, these are the plants that are available in nurseries. You don't have to hunt for them, and a kind of well-researched list of what we know in the literature about these plants. So that's really been a great thing in the Pacific Northwest with a lot of uptake. And that also falls under the purview of the program. I deal with pesticide applicators to master gardeners. I just, want to get in the bee yard, but unfortunately, I'm not doing it as much as I like. Well, when it comes to the homeowners, the other thing that came into my job description when I got here was residential beekeeping. So we have a great new, it's not new now, it's been out for a couple of years, residential beekeeping guideline. The legislature weighed in. They did not, one of the beekeepers in the Portland area, she moved to a different jurisdiction and suddenly had to face new beekeeping restrictions, even though she, was just a few miles away. And so the legislature wanted OSU to step in and come up with guidelines on how to reduce nuisances from beekeeping. And that's been another successful thing where we've really been able to, challenge some of these ideas of why 2 colonies per backyard. Some backyards can support more, like trying to get a more sensible approach to what makes sense in terms of reducing nuisances from beekeeping in urban areas.
Definitely a good idea and definitely needed. Urban beekeeping is expanding everywhere, or at least is showing up everywhere. A lot more people were keeping bees in town than people knew until bees became popular. So,
I imagine, Kim, you've seen it go up and down a couple times now, I imagine.
Yeah, I remember the 70s.
Oh, you're one of the few.
Yeah, well, you're right. I saw beekeeping and homesteading explode then, and then it lasted about 3 or 4 years, and people got tired of not taking baths and went home. But but what that does is gets your beekeepers in town working with the people who don't keep bees but like to grow plants, talking to each other, I would guess.
Oh yeah,
and that's got to only be good for the bees.
Oh, absolutely. I do think so. And I think what I've also noticed with the bee clubs, a lot of the urban bee clubs, I'm thinking like Portland Urban Beekeepers, have really kind of expanded out what a bee club does. Like, traditionally you'd go there, you'd learn how to, make splits, divides, and some basic beekeeping. But they have transitioned more into doing stewardship in terms of providing information to the public on various pollinators, but also habitat. It's remarkable. Bee clubs that I joined in the 90s don't look like the bee clubs now. They're different.
They really are. But one of the things that you just mentioned, and Jeff brought it up earlier, was some of the bee disease work you've been doing.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because that's what I started doing. When I was in Beaver Lodge working with Dr. Steve Purnell, that was when tetracycline resistance first hit, and we would come across whole bee yards hit with American foul brood in the early 2000s. So we did a lot of work on American foul brood, did a lot of work on Nosema, and then I sort of went into this job, and I thought I'd never return. But in the Pacific Northwest, and you probably have had Megan Milbrath on the show talking about EFB.
Oh, yes. A couple episodes ago, she was on with Kirsten.
Yeah, so Megan has the same problem in Michigan. The beekeepers in British Columbia, same thing. They come into blueberry pollination relatively clean, and they leave with a European foul brood that just goes on. Like, it's very heavy after blueberries, and then it just seems to persist into the summer. It's really hard to get under control, not like the European foul brood that we're all used to. And so we're doing study in collaboration with all these folks just to track and try and figure out what's going on. Like, why is this happening? Because it's really taking a lot of beekeepers are a little wary of going into blueberries specifically for this reason. It's real tough on them.
Back to the American foul brood, I was looking at some of the papers you've authored, and one was the evaluation of the shaking technique and economic management of American foul brood.
Oh yeah,
and yeah. I mean, that is a classic textbook approach to managing American foul brood. What did you find in your paper? Your review of that technique.
I was really bummed out because I wanted to start it was like Journal of Economic Entomology, and I wanted to start with a big quote from Moses Quimby, which is not how you start an academic paper. But he has this great description of it. He was a skep hive beekeeper at the time of the Civil War, and he had, which is remarkable, he ran like hundreds of colonies in skeps because the value of honey was so high. But he would, if he ran into American foul brood, he would just take the skep, take the comb out, shake the bees, and let them start again. He said it, really didn't return. So this is an old technique that's been around for a while. We had the issue in Alberta when we had American foul brood that the option was Tylosin. So Tylosin is another drug that can be used for American foul brood, of course, with a veterinary prescription. But it's persistent in honey, so you can't use it in the spring and not get it into your honey crop. You can only use it in the fall. So we were kind of curious, if a beekeeper ran into this stuff, they came out of winter and they noticed some AFB, could they shake the bees? They've got a couple options. One is just burn the colony and buy a package. Or what if they took that whole colony and shook it out? Would they come out farther ahead? And the thing that happened was, if you took a colony and you shook it out, at least up there, during the dandelion flow, that colony would recover. So you put it onto foundation, you shake it out, you shake the bees onto foundation. This breaks the disease cycle. The bees draw the comb out, and they're that puts them behind. But actually, on a strong dandelion flow, they catch up, and they don't make as much honey as an overwintered colony, but they make more honey than a package. And I thought that was really remarkable. And it just goes to show, I think, for listeners out there who are looking at things like comb replacement or even something like shaking, the spring can be very forgiving. That your colonies are going to swarm anyways. There's a lot of excess capacity. So like taking some crappy comb out and replacing it with foundation, it's a great time of year to be drawing out foundation in the spring. Like they really, when they ramp up, they ramp up.
That's really good. That's a good message.
Better Bee is pleased to present the Pollinator Week series of interviews on Beekeeping Today podcast. As a supplier to the nation's beekeepers for over 40 years, Better Bee provides the tools, equipment, and information you need to succeed. Through its many beekeeping employees, Better Bee serves you with solutions to your beekeeping challenges. That's why they can say they are your partners in better beekeeping. Thanks to Better Bee for their informative catalog, website, supportive beekeeper education, and for supporting this week's episodes. Be sure to see the latest at betterbee.com.
One of Bee Culture's longtime writers, Richard Taylor, championed that technique rather than burning because he found that it worked. He was in New York, of course, but and you mentioned Quimby. He made a great smoker, besides being a good beekeeper.
That's what he's known for, the smokers, right?
Yep.
Like he's the smoker inventor.
Yep, one of them. Well, the other thing that you brought up, last year I was at the apiary inspectors meeting, and there was sort of a consensus among the group of people that were there at that meeting that a lot of beekeepers who have routinely been treating with antibiotics just because, not because they needed to, but just because it's once in the spring and once in the fall, and that's what you do every year. When suddenly they couldn't, European especially showed up, and they'd never seen it. they didn't know what it was. So I'm wondering, have you run into that? European, well, it sounds like you've got it so much that everybody knows what it is.
Yeah, no, I think people do know it is. Well, no, I don't know if they really know. I don't know. Some people say, oh, I just thought it was snotty brood or something. Like it's some kind of like, nondescript, because it can kind of appear in. I was talking to Megan about this the other day. There is the clear corkscrew symptom, but then there's a whole bunch of symptoms that are, could be anything. So you look for this, corkscrewing where the larva is dying in some kind of twisted and contorted thing, which is diagnostic. But then there's all these other symptoms that are just a little, could be anything. And so I think but I do know that people are treating, and it's a real dilemma because, and I was talking to Megan about this, and she was, it'd be one thing if you had one colony with some EFB, dealing with it and shaking them out and getting them onto new comb invariably is a great strategy. But for some of these beekeepers, they've got a lot of it. And so it's really unrealistic for them not to be using antibiotics. They're going to need to use it. But I guess the question that's tasking us is, what's a step down procedure? Like, how can you get off of, right now it's really hard to not get away with treating in advance. You're going to get it. Everybody's going to get it. I'm going to go into colonies here in Western Oregon. I know I'm going to see it everywhere. And the question is, how can we kind of break the disease cycle and sort of ratchet off the antibiotic over time? And I don't know what the answer to that. And I know lots of smarter people are kind of working on that problem right now.
You must be dealing a lot with veterinarians. Have you been training veterinarians to be beekeepers?
I haven't, but I should be. I'm sort of scandalous I didn't mention this, but we have a wonderful apiculture program here at OSU led by Dr. Ramesh Sigili, and he has been really aggressive in reaching out to the veterinarians and providing training to the veterinarians, and also training to the beekeepers on how to navigate the new directive. And so they've done a great job of filling the gap and allowing people to connect.
Well, that's good, because often it's hard to find a veterinarian that A, wants to come to your bee yard, and then B, will look at it and know what they're looking at. So I know I was just contacted by a national group of, what did they call themselves? Veterinarians who work with beekeepers. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So there's a couple of groups out there that I know are working in that direction. So
oh, great job, Kim.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Some states are ahead of the curve. Sounds like you guys are doing a good job. Another question was about getting land planted for pollinator plants. Are you working anything with your road maintenance people, highway maintenance people?
Yeah, they've been good. It's tricky. Departments of transport are very complicated organizations, and they are very. I can understand. I really tip my hat to states that really have something up and running, like Iowa, for example. Some states have really been got things off the ground, but for states like Oregon, where there hasn't traditionally been that, it has been a bit of like figuring out where to put things. We've got a complicated situation where on the east side of the state, they barely mow. So there's no mowing that takes place, so that provides some opportunities. But here on the east side, it rains all the time. So the ability to kind of like have a mowing regime that enhances pollinating plants is difficult. They end up having very short windows to do their mowing and do their weed control. But to their credit, they've got a number of great plantings that they've got. Anybody coming into the Portland airport in the spring are going to see all the Russell hybrid lupins on the 205 corridor. There's some great pollinator plantings in and around Portland, and they've been doing monarch way stations down in Southern Oregon. And we are they also have what I like here in Oregon is if a community group gets together and wants to do a pollinator corridor, Department of Transport will sit down, identify sites, and then be able to work something out. Oh,
that sounds good. I know the Ohio State beekeepers worked with the Ohio people here, and they've got some plantings going, but it sounds like you've also, it's just, it seems to me a no-brainer, but then you've got an environment out there that's way different than I have to put up with here. So what's easier for
They've been great. They invite us to talk to them every year, the Oregon Vegetation Management Association. I talk to a lot of ODOT employees in the course of pesticide training. And they do have, public safety is really important. They have to make sure that they don't end up with weed problems. And they also have very small budgets. So fitting something in those constraints is a challenge. And they're receptive and they're looking for ideas.
Change of directions here. I was going through also some of the work that you've been doing, and I was intrigued by the Oregon Bee Atlas.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that program and what you're looking to achieve in that and the goals?
I'd love to, and I have to say, I feel a bit like a phony. I am a honeybee guy, and so when I got here and had to take up the mantle of native bee stuff, I was a little daunted. But you know what I used as my kind of vision for it was the bee clubs. Bee clubs are independent. It doesn't require the extension staff to kind of like prompt it or work it. They have their own interests. They get a lot done. And I thought, what we need in Oregon is something like the bee club that is native bee focused, where people are exploring, there's all this stuff in apiculture, figuring out how to do a demery method or a 2-queen colony. Like there are all these little things that can present lifelong learning opportunities to you. And we needed to create a pathway for somebody who wanted to learn about native bees and go down the rabbit hole, that there are all these successive steps they could take. And so that was the model we developed, and it is really unique in the United States. There's a lot of programs where volunteers are asked to do low-level tasks, like take a picture of a bee and submit it. That's not what we do. We have a Master Mellipolous Program. They chose the name. So they are hardcore folks that go around the state and they collect bees, they kill them, they put them on pins, they database them, they do museum quality mounts. And last year they collected 30,000 bees, including a number of species that we hadn't seen here since the 1950s.
Wow.
And so it really kind of I'm really amazed by their capacity, but it really is the bee club model. It's giving people tools, what they need to do things, and then setting them loose and having some kind of structure to bound it together. That's really how some of this native bee stuff is going to happen, because there's going to be no government agency who's going to send out staff to monitor bee populations. It's really got to be on the backs of people who are learning something new every day. And I think if there's that kind of pathway, and it's working here great, these folks are just remarkable. The things they're turning up are out of this world. It helps to be here in the eastern part of the U.S. It's just not the bee biodiversity, but when you're out here in the West, man, it's cool.
Well, it sure is, and it sounds like a great program. And I bet everyone's they have to be gearing up for the Asian giant hornet that's just north of me here.
Yeah, that's the great thing about these folks is they're out in all sorts of landscapes, more so than beekeepers, looking for things. And so that's one of the key things they're doing is looking for invasives. We've got tons of invasive bees. We've got the Japanese mason bee loose in the Portland area. There's Bombus impatiens, the eastern bumblebee, is kind of coming down the I-5. It's headed your way, Jeff. So, and we've got Asian hornet. These folks are great because they're really keen to sort of go to special, they really get good coverage around the state and they can spot things. And I imagine, heaven forbid, that it makes its way into Oregon, but they'll be the first ones to know.
Yeah. Well, it's a good network.
We just talked to Kim Eierman, who has a book out called The Pollinator Victory Garden. I don't know if you're aware of it, but one of the chapters in her book is providing habitat for native bees. Piles of sticks and ground that isn't disturbed, and all of the kinds of habitats that natives use. So if there's people looking to establish something other than beekeepers,
oh, good,
honeybees in the backyard, this might be something to look at. She did a good job with that.
Well, I'll say the one thing I really love is sometimes you get an antagonism between people who are native bee people and honeybee people. But a lot of the people who are in the Master Mellipolous Program, I was thinking about Steve Gomez, for example, is a master beekeeper, or Linda Zoll, or there's a bunch of them who actually just want to do both. Like they're just like, I'm curious about, and they're positioned well, because if you take apiculture, you're really well rooted in bee biology. You're in a much better position to learn about native bees than if you just were a butterfly person. So that like the mix is good.
And that's what I saw as an observation, and I think you alluded to it. The beekeeper today is different than beekeeper back in the 80s or 90s, because the beekeeper today is much more aware of all the native bees and the interaction, whereas back in the 80s and 90s, I know in our bee clubs, we never talked about any native species or bumblebees or anything, unless it was yellow jackets attacking the hive. So, yeah, it's interesting.
I know, but I have to say, my first love is beekeeping, and the thing I love about beekeeping is that there's so many different rabbit holes that you can follow. Like, you can really go in so many different directions. As a hobby, it can fill your life up. And I just felt like in native bee work, you either were a university professor or nothing. Like, there wasn't this in between place where somebody could like, okay, today I'm going to learn the bees of cactuses in Eastern Oregon, as one of our volunteers has taken upon themselves to do. And it's just like, yeah, that's what we're missing. We're missing the bee club for native bee people.
That's really cool. We've talked for the last little bit here, but we haven't mentioned your own podcast, PolliNation. Is it PolliNation Nation? PolliNation. PolliNation.
It's PolliNation, but maybe I'll change it to Pollination Nation. That's catchy.
Well, no, I've already got it. No, I'm just kidding. So talk to us about your podcast and just a little cross pollination while we're talking about pollination.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about you guys too. Like, my motivation was I was thrust into a job. I knew a fair amount about honeybees, but all of these other things like weed management, establishing pollinator habitat, butterfly, I didn't know any of this stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just run here's an excuse for me to call somebody up. Like, if I call somebody up and say, tell me about butterflies, it'd be like, they probably wouldn't, hey, I'll put you on a show and we'll talk about butterflies. Then I thought like, I'd kind of like learn. And so I started with the intention that if nobody listened to the show, that'd be fine, because at least I could just educate myself in the process. That was my primary motivation for getting started. But Jeff, you were probably, I heard that you approached Kim, and I was listening. We have a podcast with Kim on it. It was just like, because I was fascinated with Kim because, Kim has this library of beekeeping going back to the 19th century. And it was like, oh, but you've like crossed over in the 21st century, you're a podcast communicator. So I was kind of like curious how you guys got started too, because I thought that's a great story. You're steeped in beekeeping communication.
Well, Kim and I wrote for Kim in the 80s and 90s and a couple times in the 2000s. And we've kept in touch. And then Kim was asking me when I'd start writing for him. And then one week, Sherry Jennings, my wife, who's used to be with the National Honey Board, and I were in Ohio. We stopped in and visited Kim. And Kim said, well, when are you going to write the article? And I said, well, what about a podcast? And Kim says, what's a podcast? And so that was the genesis of it then. And we started with the Pollinator Week 2 years ago. This will be starting our third year this June.
Oh, great.
And it's been a blast. I'll let Kim talk from his perspective, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been fun. We get to talk to people like you and learn about native pollinators in a different part of the world than I live. So it's been a good time, and we get to talk to neat people. So hopefully people are listening, but I think I'm kind of like you. Even if they're not, I'm learning. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have a great show, and your guests are your guests are great.
I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
The funny thing about our show is like it's a weird mix. Like we have a couple shows on beekeeping, and we try to keep it close to Oregon because there's a lot of good beekeeping podcasts that people can go to. But oftentimes it's like I've had a legislator on there. I've had Department of Transport people, have native seed collection people. I've had growers. I've had nursery owners. It's more like I'm just kind of curious about like all these other groups that are just not that they're doing pollinator stuff, but you don't know much about them. I'm mostly interested in those. The shows I really love is where we've got like a person who actually knows how to turn up soil and set something up. It's like those how-to. I think we have the next episode is with Kim Patton, this guy who worked in the cranberry industry and really figured out how to set up these heather plantings on the edges of the cranberry bogs to attract bumblebees. It's cheap, efficient. This is a system that has been proven. I just think, people should know about that. Like, pollinator habitat doesn't have to be this expensive, elaborate native seed, complicated venture. It can be actually pretty cost effective, but you got to talk to the people who've done it.
Yeah.
And that's one of our approaches, I think, also is we're not focusing so much on the how-tos, but why, the whys, or what's the
so
background behind why are we doing this? I mean, there's a lot of sources for the how-to, and but getting to talk to people like you and our other guests, and as to why we are doing this, why this is being recommended, I thought, and we continue to think that that's the right path for our podcast, at least for the foreseeable time.
It is, and you have to remember there's a big gulf. Beekeeping, a lot of the how-to, there's a million bee clubs who can tell you how to make a split, but when it comes to like all the other stuff, like a pesticide applicator needing to know, like, there is no how-to manuals for that. That stuff is kind of groundbreaking. And so we're a little bit behind you, hoping to catch up one day.
One of the things that I mentioned or that I ran across was that you guys are doing some seed packs and some postcards. Tell me about that project.
Oh, yeah. Oh, postcards. I love postcards. We have a series of postcards. We got one, for example, responsible mason bee management, where it just goes through. It's easy. We have a graphic designer. Her name is Iris Corman. She worked with me in the past. She's now in Switzerland. She makes these nice flat graphics, so your eye is drawn specifically on what to do. We've got one for, how to work in, if you're a landscaper, the kind of pest management to avoid. We've got one on how to read a pesticide label, which we're working together with NAPSI now. We're going to roll it out with NAPSI. We've got one with the bees of Oregon. It's got these beautiful high-resolution pictures of bees of Oregon. Those are great because we've got this volunteer base of master gardeners and master beekeepers who see the public all the time, and now they've got something to give to them. The cards are, a penny a piece to make. But we train them up. They got to take a little course to get, and then we'll send them out to them for free if they take the course, how to speak about these cards. And then that puts us out across the state with some really good resources that can be used to communicate what we want people to do. The seed packs, we've got 3 seed packs this year. The seed packs, 2 of the seed packs are meant to promote those growers who took that bold step forward to do pollinator protection strategy. So we have one that's an annual clover seed mix. So these are annual clovers that are going to come up this year. We have a number of great annual clovers, and I have one clover that's from out of the state. We had a podcast with a guy, Bob Vulcaner, who used Hubram clover. You know Hubram clover? It's like a sweet clover that's annual. UBAM, that's it.
That's it. Yep.
So it's in there because he grew it, and I love sweet clover, but the idea of a kind of annual one just intrigued me. But then the other one is we came up with a seed mixture that we thought would be easy, an annual seed mixture that would attract a broad range of pollinators. So it has Phacelia, a sunflower, and then what's the other thing? And then crimson clover. We think with those 3 plants, you can actually get quite a few bee species. They're cheap and easy to put together. And then we have a native bee one, a native plant one that are high end. You only get a couple of these seeds. They're, some of our beautiful native plants here in Oregon that attract some of the weirder bees. So yeah, we've got these 3 packs. Volunteers give them out, and they're able to talk about them. And the one that the specialty seed growers actually has a beautiful high resolution image of a honeybee on the front. So it's really stunning.
What a great program.
I'm going to bet that we're going to provide information on how to get more on those 2 programs, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll give you some links. And And we also, with any state that is interested in doing stuff like this, we've often just, I think with a residential beekeeping guideline or pesticide guides, Canada has been interested. We just give it to people. So if you're in another state and you're an extension person and you're looking for some information on this, don't recreate it. We'd be glad to give it to you free of cost. Just, put the state of Ohio on there and away you go.
There you go.
Classic extension. I love it. It's been great talking to you again, Andony. I'll get it right yet. And let us know how some of your programs go. We'll get you back here again in a while, and you can get us up to date on some of this. Some of this sounds really exciting.
All right. Thanks for being on the show, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Take care, you guys.
Be safe.
Bye-bye. Be safe. Thank you. Right. Bye-bye.
Andony's quite a character. He's did a really good show, and it seems like he's got a great program underway down in Oregon.
He does. And, I learned a lot. I didn't know there was nearly that many seed growers in his state. And 5,000 pesticide applicators. Holy cow. And he's teaching them how to read. Fortunately, somebody's teaching them how to read pesticide labels. I got to believe that that's only going to make things better. Honeybees and blueberries have always been a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have it out there. So it's good that they're looking at it. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to solve it, but at least somebody's looking at it again.
Yeah, I was surprised that the blueberries was such a problem. First, learned about it when earlier this spring when we talked to Megan Melbreath, or actually when Kirsten did, and reinforced now with Andony. So it's been a good learning experience.
It has been, and I think we'll just wrap this up. But take advantage of all of the stuff that he's got for free, all of the postcards and all of the things that you can get to help your program promote pollinators wherever you are.
That's right. And who do we have coming up tomorrow, Kim?
We have Ron Bittner of Ron Bittner's Winery. He's in Treasure Valley in Idaho, and I've been there. I have a bottle of his wine sitting on my table right now, and I'm looking forward to talking to him again.
No, you're not saying right now whether that's full or empty bottle, are you?
No, I'm not.
All right, and he's with the Bee Friendly Farming Program from Pollinator Partnership. Fantastic.
Right.
Well, I look forward to that interview. Well, that about wraps it up for this podcast. And before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. We want to thank our Pollinator Week sponsor, Better Bee, for sponsoring this week's specials. You can find them at www.betterbee.com. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued sponsorship of Beekeeping Today podcast as we head off into our 3rd season. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@Beekeeping Today podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else you want to mention, Kim?
Raise a glass of wine to Pollinator Week, Jeff.
I will definitely do that. All right. Thanks a lot.